Hi everyone, I'm just going to make some quick baking powder biscuits today and just wanted to join you in real quick on the recipe. I've had some requests for some cooking videos on the wood cook stove or in the wood cook stove, so here we go. So the recipe is pretty basic. My recipe came from a cookbook back in the 1800s and there's slight variations for everybody in the baking powder biscuits. Like I use butter, and back then they would recommend butter or lard. Excuse me. A lot of different tricks. Everyone says this makes the perfect baking biscuits, or someone else says this makes the perfect baking biscuits. Temperature, they say the temperature of the butter, the temperature of the oven. The things that I have noticed to be most important is the amount of liquid to flour ratio, and the temperature of the oven is very important. If your oven's too cold, when you start to bake your biscuits, the biscuits become tough. They get a tough outer shell. They'll rise and stuff, but they're going to be a little bit crunchier than some people like, and chewier. So if that makes sense, crunchy and chewy, does it go together? In a biscuit baked wrong, it does. So you're going to need, for basic recipe, and I do really poorly with writing down quantities, and I don't have the cookbook in front of me, and I've used this recipe for so long, I just kind of go by eye, and if you've watched any of my other videos, cooking videos, you know, and I know that's a detriment to those trying to learn to cook, so I'm trying here to get a ratio for you. So you'd start with probably like a half a cup or a stick of butter, just a teaspoon of salt. You'd use a tablespoon of baking powder and a tablespoon of cornstarch. Now here's a little secret about baking powder. If you've never made your own baking powder, it is the most fabulous thing you've ever done, because it makes the texture of your baked goods that call for baking powder totally different. And the ratio is equal parts baking soda, equal parts cornstarch, and equal parts cream of tartar. Now you notice that I'm not doing that today, and I will tell you why. Because I cannot find organic cream of tartar anywhere. So I have had to revert back to baking powder, and I still use cornstarch because I can find a GMO-free and organic, or an organic form of cornstarch. And it technically gives the same texture as the recipe I just gave you. And if you don't have the cornstarch and you can't make your own baking powder, the baking powder store-bought is fine. I mean, it gives it a nice, a nice texture, but just adding that extra, if you can only just add the cornstarch, it just really, you'll be amazed at the difference it makes in your product. And don't forget flour. You need flour. So you've got your half stick of butter, and you put in approximately anywhere from 3 to 4 cups of flour. All right, and I'm going to measure it out. Any of you that watched my flour video, you're going to say, well, you're not using your golden white flour, and you're right. I'm not today because I don't have any. I had to get the local grocery store's organic flour, and it's a nice flour, but it's certainly not my golden white flour. That stuff is just incredible.
It's the best.
It's the bomb. So a little bit of salt. Now this, you can see this isn't the standard measuring teaspoon. So I'm just going to give a good healthy, what I would say, tablespoon, and dump it in there. The same with my cornstarch. I might even give it a little extra. Maybe not that much extra. But a rule of thumb is a tablespoon's good. Yeah, cooking is chemistry. If you're into science or chemistry, it's an experiment. Play around. Don't be afraid to do different things. And then make notes, though, because once you find that texture that you love, if you're one of those that has to have it the same every way, you'll want to know what you did. If you're one that doesn't mind a little variation like myself, the notes aren't important. There are some things that I make that I have to do the same each way, just because the flavor usually involves spices and stuff. So you can use a pastry cutter to cut in your butter or your lard, whichever you choose. If you choose to use lard, again, it's just a half a cup. And actually, I think lard comes in, and they're not sticks, but it's a pound. I've seen lard at the store in the pound type thing, so you'd cut that in a quarter. But if you're using homemade lard, it's a half a cup. And if you don't want to use a pastry cutter, you see I'm just using my fingers, and you don't mind a little bit of messy hands. You got to mix it up anyways. You got to add water to it. The original recipe I used years ago required milk. It was fine. It worked great, but I didn't always have milk. Either my goats were dry, or I just didn't have any from the store bought on hand. And so over the years, I've tried to find alternative sources of recipes that just to be able to use what I've got. And this recipe from the old cookbook called for water, and I find it's just as good, and maybe not a little better than the milk. The milk gave it a little bit of a heavy texture, and this is usually nice and fluffy. So the liquid portion, depending on what flour you use, it's going to determine also exactly how much liquid, and that can vary from as much as a half a cup to maybe a mouthful, so to say. Sorry, it's an inside joke here. How much liquid
I
do you
put her
use?
up to this.
How much liquid do you use in that? Oh, about a mouthful. So we go back to the old rule of thumb. You got to make it enough to know the texture. But I'm going to give you just this general idea by measuring per cup. This goes against my grain, guys. And not using measurements does not make somebody a superior cook. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I don't want to be confined to it has to be exactly like this. I've watched people be so constrained because it has to be exactly as the recipe says that they don't get the pleasure in cooking and experimenting. So a long time ago, I quit using measurements for the most part. I get a general range, I keep that in mind, and then I'm done. Again, I'm not saying that not using the measurements makes anybody better at cooking. It's hard when you don't use them anymore. Just like it's hard if you always use them. I guess it's tit for tat. So that was 1 cup. Now this flour is a lot finer than my golden white. And see, 2 cups, and now it's too runny. So I'm going to have to add a little more flour, and that's okay. That's not a big deal. By now I should be able to not need the spoon, but be needing my hands.
You need to need them.
I need to need them. And sometimes it doesn't take much. It's kind of like the liquid deal. Like I've put in about a half a cup, and it's looking pretty good. I'll probably use the other half. So I've got 5 cups flour in here just because I've used too much water for this type of flour. You don't want to over knead biscuits. You want to knead them enough, but you're not kneading flour. If you over knead, they become tough. You're looking for a specific texture. And again, the only way to know that is to just do it. Hands on. It's the best way to learn cooking. Okay, that's pretty good.
Her hands are literally on it. So.
In all actuality, I probably could use a little more flour, but I'm just going to go with it like it is, and we'll take it from there. All right, the great thing about this recipe, first off, you do not have to butter your pan. Now, I do dishes by hand. Every dish counts. So I'm looking for recipes that's saving me time and saving me a mess in the kitchen. Some can be cut on, some cannot. This, you simply, see, it's still too sticky. It's sticking to my hand, so I'm going to take the rest of that. You just pat it out to the thickness you want. I like about a 1/2 inch thick. My handy dandy expensive biscuit cutter. Now and I'm just telling you, I mean, this is real life here. It happens every day in the kitchen. Something you don't want. In this circumstance, what I don't want is extra flour on my cookie sheet, because it'll just brown and smell a little bit burnt. It's not going to affect the biscuit, so I'll try to wipe that up as I go. So my oven is good and hot, and you stick your biscuits, depending on how many you have, you want them kind of touching when you cook them. All right, so let's put them in. And we'll be back. So make sure that you check your biscuits midway through. Temperature in a conventional oven, I'm going to say, is probably looking around 450. In a wood stove, to where you almost can't let your hand be in there. The ladies of old used to test the temperature like this. Okay, your hand could sit in there. It was a cool oven. If it was warm, a couple 100 degrees, then once you got up to, ow, that hurts, you're talking 350 or so. So make sure you also turn your biscuits to give them but then brown equally, because there's always hot spots in an oven, especially in a wood stove oven. So in a hot oven, you probably want to cook them 20-25 minutes until they're just a light brown on top and on bottom. These ones, again, this recipe creates a really fluffy, flaky biscuit. We'll let our tester come in and try it.
So flaky, they're falling apart.
Are they good?
Yes!